And we're going to finish up here. So we know how to find the measure of angles. Now, we can talk about the fact that two angles are congruent if they have the same measure, a lot like segments. Okay? Congruent, again, just a fancy word for same size. So if two angles have the same measure, they're going to be congruent. And so the way we talk about angles and their measures will dictate the symbols that we use. So if two angles are congruent and they have the same measure, so if we want to talk about the measure of the angles, we're talking about numbers. So the measure of angle A is going to be equal to the measure of angle B here. And when we're writing it out, if we're talking about the angles themselves, we want to use that congruent symbol. We drop the M's because now we're talking about the physical figure themselves. Angle A and angle B are congruent. Okay? I also want to point out to you the fact that if we see angles in a diagram and if we know they're congruent, or if we want to communicate to anybody that they are congruent, then what we'll do is we'll add these little arcs here. Change my pen color here. These arcs right here. And they'll tell you, they're like tick marks for segments. Okay? Those arcs will tell us that those angles are congruent. If we have multiple pairs of angles in a diagram that are congruent, then we can always add arcs. Right? Two arcs means that those two angles are still congruent. Okay? An angle bisector. There's that word bisector again. An angle bisector is a ray that divides an angle into two angles that are congruent. Bisects. We talked about that before. Bi meaning two. Sex means to cut in half. Sect means to cut, right? So we're going to cut it in two, and to the point where those two pieces are congruent. Okay? So that's what an angle bisector does. Okay? Quick example here for you. Photograph shows some of the angles formed by the ropes in a trapeze apparatus. Identify the congruent angles. And then if the measure of angle DEG is 157 degrees, how's that going to help us find the measure of angle GKL? Okay? Again, like we just said, those arcs, the arcs in pictures are what are going to tell us which angles are congruent. And so if we look close, we see that those two angles have the same set of arcs. And so we know that angle DEG is congruent to angle LKG. Okay? And we also see here that those two angles are congruent. So angle DEF is congruent to angle JKL. Okay? And so we move on to the second part. If we know that angle DEG is 157 degrees, what's the measure of angle GKL? Well, since these two guys are marked congruent, and we have our little congruence symbol here, that tells us that the measure of angle GKL is going to be the same, 157. Okay? Congruent angles, much like congruent segments. All right. Now, another quick application of both the angle addition postulate and the idea of bisecting an angle. So here we've got a situation where the diagram at the right, we talk about ray YW, and oh, by the way, angle bisectors are always rays. Okay? An angle bisector has to start at the same endpoint as the sides of our angle, and then it goes through, it'll go through a point on the interior of angle XYZ, and it goes through it in a way that bisects that angle. So the second we see the word bisects, we know that these two angles are going to be the exact same, right? Angle XYW, WYZ. are going to be congruent. And we see those marks there. Again, we got to be pretty good at sketching these pictures. If we don't have one, you have to understand that if YW bisects angle XYZ, how you want to draw that, because it's going to really help having a visual aid here in how to set this problem up. Okay, so we know that angle XYW is 18 degrees, so we want to find the measure of angle XYZ. Again, I'm going to employ the angle addition postulate if at all possible. So I know the measure of angle XYW plus the measure of angle WYZ has to equal the measure of angle XYZ. And then plug in what we know. Okay? We know that angle XWY is 18 degrees, so this guy's 18. We haven't specifically been given the measure of angle WYZ, but because these guys are congruent, right? These guys are congruent. These guys are the same angle measures. Okay? Then we know that angle WYZ is also 18. And of course, it becomes pretty simple from there. We just add these two guys and get 36. So angle XYZ is 36 degrees. Now, that is the long scenic route to get to the measure of angle XYZ. Some of you are probably sitting there saying, oh, it was 36, I knew that 5 minutes ago. Well, good, if you did, right? Obviously, if YW is going to bisect, then these two angles are going to be the same, XYW and WYZ. So if one of them is 18, the other one's 18, just double 18, and you get 36. So if you get there that fast, fantastic. If not, then keep using the angle addition postulate. That's going to help a lot, okay? And we'll fast forward through that, okay? And that's pretty much what we got for angles, okay? Ignore all of this. Book assignment. Your homework is posted in Canvas, okay?